turn off my video. Ah, perfect. Okay, here we are. Okay, so hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think now we could start. We are 3 minutes late, but I think it should be fine. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. Welcome to this panel titled Leveraging AI in Diplomacy and Foreign Affairs, Transformative Opportunities and Future Application. So I'm Dr. Amandine Yanguenon, Senior Advisor at the Data Innovation Lab. And I have the privilege to moderate this session with a diverse panel of experts representing various fields. So this session actually will investigate the profound potential of AI in reshaping the landscape of global diplomacy and foreign policy. Just to let you know, so this session is organized by the Data Innovation Lab at the German Federal Foreign Office. And a very special thank you to our speakers for accepting the invitation, to the organizer for this Data for Peace event, and especially Branka. A big thanks for you, Branka, and the Data Innovation Lab team, of course. Just allow me first to say a few words about the Data Innovation Lab. It is an innovative collaboration established between the German Federal Foreign Office and the GovTech campus in Germany in June this year. And it serves as a dynamic hub fostering collaboration among diverse stakeholders in Germany and globally. And we organize actually the first September online data talk focused on feminism, foreign policy. You will see the link in the chat box. And if you are interested, we are also organizing in October, in the 30th of October, the next data talk on data sovereignty in Africa, challenge and opportunity. So this is for the introduction. So I think without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our panelists. So today we have two speakers from the German Federal Foreign Office, Hans-Christian Mangeldorf, the Chief Data Scientist, and Raphael Lerner, Data Scientist. And additionally, we have two speakers from the UN, Martin Weilich, team leader at the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, and Anusha Dandapani, Chief Data and Analytics at the United Nations International Computing Centers. So for the audience, feel free to make comments and ask questions in the chat box. And for the speakers, of course, you can answer the question posted in the chat box during the session. So first, I would like to start maybe with Hans-Christian. Could you please share with us some concrete projects and the current state of play regarding AI strategy and AI ethics strategy at the GFFO? Over to you, Hans-Christian.
Thank you very much, Amandine, and it's a pleasure to be with you here, although it's only online in quotation marks, and also good evening. Well, in Germany, it's good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Glad to do so. Thanks, Amandine, for the introduction. So, I would put it like this. I mean, the train has left the station in a way. We at the German Federal Foreign Office decided about a year and a half ago to set up an AI and data lab, and we have done so. We have put it into operation, and ever since then, ever since August 2022, we have tried to develop our capabilities and to bring data and, in a way, artificial intelligence into the house and make it available in various forms. In doing so, we invested quite a bit in our technical expertise, in our hardware infrastructure, but first and foremost also in our governance, in our internal governance. That includes our data governance, where we have recently got approval for our internal data strategy. So it's not only the German government that has a data strategy recently republished, but also the FFO, the Federal Foreign Office, has a data strategy which sets out a number of targets, including data literacy, including a better and more profound data management, etc., etc. And I'm happy to share a few more thoughts or ideas about that later throughout the discussion. And then, obviously, everybody started to talk about AI at some point in time. I mean, those who have been in the field for a couple of years For those of you, it's nothing surprising that large language models would suddenly and at some point in time surface and capture our attention, also capture decision makers' attention. So that happened, and for us, that was a moment to really pull together our expertise internally, but also externally, and that's why. That's partly why we decided to create the Data Innovation Lab, which is, Amandine, as you rightly said, a place for collaboration and a place for outreach. But anyway, so we decided to invest quite substantially in our artificial intelligence capabilities. We are currently running a proof of concept to really make large language models and their strengths available internally in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it looks quite promising, to be honest. But at the same time, we decided to not only focus on technology, but rather also take a look at the more difficult parts, actually, and that's the governance angle. So we recently decided to embark on a journey that would hopefully, towards the end of the year of this year, bring us an AI strategy guidelines for the use of artificial intelligence in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and simply because we want to make sure that technology at the one side and governance on the other side kind of walk in sync, just to make sure that we capture opportunities, but don't forget about risks and challenges. And finally, and this is kind of a cross-cutting issue, once you're introducing a more data-driven method or way of working, and once you're trying to introduce artificial intelligence as a tool that ultimately is going to serve everybody in the organization, you have to invest into data literacy. And that's also part of this governance debate that we're having internally. Now, Amandine, you rightly asked for specific use cases. And looking a little bit over to Martin and the UN headquarters building that is in his virtual background, that's obviously one of those use cases that we have in mind. Huge amounts of data that our colleagues are being confronted with when sitting in international negotiations. That could be the United Nations, that could be the European Union, that could be the G7 or other forums, or other fora, sorry. And we want to try if we can really provide our colleagues with a tool that helps them to work through huge amounts of documents in no time. That's one case. The other one that we are having in mind is, or that we are currently exploring, is making available the knowledge that we are having internally. We have quite a substantive amount of documents, regulations, but also really useful information internally. And we want to make sure that we can use artificial intelligence to kind of pull away the curtains and make that more easily available for colleagues. And finally, and this is something that is probably going to keep us busy in 2024, we have a whole lot of regular tasks, and that could be anything from consular tasks to policy paper writing, speech writing, etc. And let's try to use artificial intelligence. But again, these are not low-hanging fruits. Here we really have to invest not only in technology, but in governance, and well, simply to put in place a few safeguards. So Amandine, before I throw the ball to you again, as I said, the train has somehow left the station. We're not alone. The German government as such has decided to set up quite a number of data labs, basically one data lab per ministry. So we are intensively coordinating with them, working together with them. And it's really inspiring to see that this group of colleagues is not taking the usual approach of typical government officials, but is rather focusing on things like, let's get it done. Let's simply try to put in place useful applications. To close out, no artificial intelligence without data. So happy to discuss data as well in this panel. Yeah, because again, we want to leverage AI, so we need to leverage also the power of data. Amadine, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hans Christian, especially to emphasize this idea to connect technology and governance. I think it's definitely a key takeaway and a key idea to, as you say, how they can work in sync to capture the opportunities and also all the risks and challenges. I think it's particularly important and to keep as a takeaway. Maybe now we can continue with Raphael. Raphael, you attended a workshop on foreign policy and AI organized by Cornelius Adebar from the German Council on Foreign Relations and Gunda Emke from the Data Innovation Lab a week ago. This workshop actually gathered foreign policy experts to explore where AI can potentially augment their work and where it should not be applied due to ethical, privacy, and other concern. So, Raphael, based on your experience and based on this, after this meeting, what are your main conclusions? What are the main takeaways from these events? Raphael, over to you.
Thanks, Amandine, and also a warm hello to all of you, wherever you may be. Yes, so as you have mentioned, we have organized basically a workshop for a day here in Berlin that meant to bring together people from different angles, right? Civil society, technology, development cooperation, foreign policy, as well as law. So we really brought together a wide array of people with different perspectives, and the most important thing, of course, we had a number of panels and presentations about AI regulation as well as technical applications, and we saw a couple of probably quite early use cases of AI, both in government as well as in international cooperation. But I think my most important takeaway from there were actually brainstorming and ideating new use cases for AI, because I think, as Hans Christian has mentioned, we're at the moment still doing very, very basic work when it comes to texts, right? It's about text summarization, it may be about text translation. So things that make the work easier in a field that, and that is true for both foreign policy and government as well, is very text-centric. I think last week we tried to open our minds a little bit and talk more about, well, if we maybe move away from this pure text perspective, what else can we do? Martin was there as well, and I think really a number of fascinating ideas came out. I just want to highlight one or two here. One that was developed also with some colleagues of ours from the Federal Foreign Office was who are heavily involved with their work on disinformation, was that right now the talk of using AI and disinformation is a lot, of course, how AI can generate information or how it can find disinformation. The idea in this workshop was, well, we could also use AI to educate people, and we would leave the decision whether something is true or false, whether something is valuable information or is disinformation. We would leave that to the people themselves, but AI could be used to support them in learning and in being trained in how to discover this information. Another approach that we discussed was when we look at sort of a global administrative perspective. For example, if you have the UN or EU in mind, Hans Christian has mentioned, we're working with huge amounts of documents. And on top of that, when it comes to international negotiations, we're looking at a lot of different positions that need to be brought together, both probably in a very limited amount of time and in a big media spotlight. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to get all this information, all these positions from different nations, including positions that come from civil societies, from NGOs, it can be hard to condense those together and really find common grounds, find where do we actually agree on things and where might be areas where we still disagree. And one idea that we discussed quite extensively last week was how AI could bring a more unbiased perspective in this process and really help in a world where where we sometimes feel like there's a lot of things we don't agree on. Maybe an AI could help us to single out those points where, well, our positions might not be so far apart. But of course, Amandine, you have mentioned, we also did this workshop with a very clear perspective on ethics and an ethical perspective. We have seen different organizations bring out their own proposals on how to implement ethical AI. And while the discussions about regulation and about laws are still ongoing in very different fields around the world, I think the suggestions on how AI can be implemented ethically do overlap quite a bit, whether you look at UNESCO guidelines or at OECD guidelines, for example. And for us, they were really helpful in both focusing and narrowing down the use cases themselves and look at the use cases to be as useful for societies and for the world in general, but they also help, or they can help at least, in answering some questions, some technical questions when it comes to implementation. And I think if I had to sum it up, for me, that would be the most important perspective, is that when you're trying to develop a project, when you're trying to implement a project, in these phases, it's always important to bring together people with different perspectives, right? A policy unit or a policy department shouldn't be planning a use case themselves without other perspectives, even if they think they know all the policy and all the work that needs to be done in this field. You know, you need the technical perspective, you need maybe the specialist perspective on the ground, and you might also need legal perspectives. And the same is true vice versa. You know, I, as a technician, as a data scientist, often don't have the domain knowledge that I need to create a responsible use case, or even identify the most relevant use case at the moment. So I think what I learned from the workshop, and what is an important takeaway for us, is that it's important to connect on perspectives, on use cases, and identify the most pressing challenges where AI can be a part. It won't be the entire solution, but it can be a part in the solution. Thanks. Back to you, Amandine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raphael. I think that actually one of the big takeaways, probably how we can actually use AI to better agree and also to understand what we disagree. I think the point you raised, that most of the time we need to make sure that there is a lot of position who need to be brought together in a very, very quickly, in a very efficient manner, is also very interesting from what you said. I would like now to pass the floor to Martin. We know that the integration of AI into diplomacy and foreign affairs is a real involving and critical area that demands thorough exploration and collaboration. So Martin, from your perspective at the UN, especially from the PPA, what are your thoughts on this and what can you share with us? Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Amadi. And let me start by thanking the German Foreign Office for leading the way on new technologies. It was in April 2019 when the Germans had the presidency in the Security Council and hosted the first ever virtual reality screening for Security Council members back then in the permanent mission. And Germany since then has supported us in the Innovation Cell and many others through the Complex Risk Analytics Fund that also makes this event happen. So just wanted to say that up front. Now, when it comes to AI, I think indeed, as Hans Christian and Raphael already mentioned, kind of this technology as we see it today is taking foreign affairs also by storm. We had a session in the Security Council on the 23rd of May this year, hosted by the UK, that pointed out challenges when it comes to cyber threats where new technologies play a role, but also new opportunities under the umbrella AI for good. And indeed, artificial intelligence, machine learning is not new for the United Nations. I always like to cite a paper from 1982, which was produced back then in a special unit of the Secretary General in New York on arms range modeling using machine learning in the context of the Cold War. And that paper is available in the UN library. So back then, over 40 years ago, there was already a machine learning approach trying to make sense of spending and nuclear warheads to get some kind of prediction of how the Cold War will end. And since then, a lot of things have happened, and ITU puts together a nice compendium every year since 2018, which is called the Compendium of Activities on Artificial Intelligence. So those who want to know a bit more about what the UN has been up to for the last years, I'll point you to that document. And certainly with the MDGs and with the SDGs, our colleagues in the statistics departments of the United Nations, have used machine learning for decades to make sense of how the world is spinning and help us identify where the pain points are. Now, maybe 3 examples from our work in the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, and we exist as an innovation cell, again, thanks to extra budgetary funding made available by Germany and other donors. Since 4 years, we are focused on a range of approaches that indeed put technology to the forefront, simply because we live in this 4th industrial revolution. We have our phones with us, I think, closer than often our loved ones. Probably spend more time in Zoom calls than our families, if you count this over the week. And it's Friday, so I'm counting the days or the hours in that regard. And that also means that we need to be careful not to be just turning to technology for the sake of technology. And to highlight one project that has really proven to be meaningful is our work on digital dialogues that took off during the pandemic, basically a way for the United Nations and especially peacemakers, peace mediators to engage with large constituencies. We were lucky enough to find UN leadership to take a chance on us in Yemen and in Libya, to try out basically as AI-assisted dialogues that allow peace mediators to talk to thousands of people at the same time. And that combines basically the power of a poll, which is scale, with the flexibility and the intimacy of a focus group. And since then, I think this has become more and more mainstream. We have repeated those kind of dialogues in over 10 places in the world. A second example that comes to my mind, which I think is also taking off because of a second technological advancements, is our work on geospatial analysis. This goes hand in hand with just the affordances of space travel taken over by private companies. It's not a domain just for the military anymore. So we have sensors in space that allow us nearly at real time, and we see this now with the war in the Middle East, to get a picture from the sky on what's happening on the ground where we don't have access. And with this high cadence comes a huge challenge, which means how do we find the needle in the haystack? And in the past, satellite imagery analysts would do this in a very meticulous way for hours and days. And now we have machine learning that helps us identify destroyed buildings. For instance, yesterday, as part of this conference, we had a session on geospatial analysis, and we heard a case from the Red Cross and our colleagues from UNICC that use machine vision algorithms to identify destructive buildings. And likewise, for us in the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, we look at algorithmic models to identify, for instance, certain kind of military equipment, airplanes or tanks, so that we get a sense for frontline developments. And that's, with regard to high intensity conflicts or conflicts where we can actually see the equipment on the ground from space. Now, a much greater opportunity thanks to machine learning. And a third example, I think, that comes to mind, again, also funded by CRAF'd, the Complex Risk Fund, is our work on climate change and climate security issues, where we basically have collected over the last years publicly available data sets that give us a sense for environmental factors in the Middle East. And now we are scaling this to Central Africa. And here again, AI is a helpful friend for labeling data and then eventually finding outliers with regard to the kind of different data factors that we are analyzing. So those are 3 examples, I think, where AI has become more and more handy. Hans-Christian mentioned the productivity and big bureaucracies. I agree with you, Hans-Christian, on that. That's an opportunity where every colleague in HR, logistics, security, feels the change. And that's why I think this is a good opportunity for us working on innovation and data in big bureaucracies, because this kind of foundational technology is now becoming more and more relevant for everybody, not just for substantial colleagues working on political affairs. But that also poses some challenges. And Christian already mentioned data collection, data literacy, and procurement. We work on that as well. We created a peace and security data hub, for instance. Also on that, we had a separate session on Tuesday in the conference, where we basically have a repository of data. I mean, what data is the machine going to analyze if we don't have a good data stock, And we kind of built a foundational stepping stone some time ago. But there remain kind of, a range of opportunities, especially with regard to multilingualism, something we're very passionate about, the UN, where machine learning can provide instant translation, summarization. I'll leave it with that. And yeah, I look forward to a further discussion. And I know Anusha is next, so I'm looking forward to hear more what the International Computing Center is doing, who is also a great ally in that for many of us in the UN family. Back to you, Amandine.
Thank you so much, Martin. And I will be interested in learning more about also your lessons learned when we talk about also the way decision makers are using, because you talk about 3 specific examples, but I know that this is one of the key questions. So once we have all this information, all this work done, do you have any feedback on how it helps decision-making process after that? But anyway, Anusha, now this is your turn. I would like you to maybe enlighten us on how the United Nations International Computing Center facilitate digital diplomacy, especially using digital tools and techniques for diplomatic activities. So Anusha, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Amandine. Thank you, colleagues. Nice to see you all virtually today. Definitely, from our perspective, so we have all followed the recent evolution, right? Like for the Gen AI, and we see that employing large language models such as OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bing, or Google Bard. What we see is that these tools present potential to enhance our productivity. They do bring about inherent risks for individuals and societies and organizations. So we do make sure that when we are taking advantage of these capabilities and tools, we also keep in mind that we manage the relevant risks and make sure that the UN system and the personnel who are using Gen AI with the sort of a governance and also the guidelines that we bring to the table. What we talk about when it comes to these advanced technologies is that coming up with an AI operational framework. What we mean by operational framework is we are enabling our partner agencies with many of these AI use cases where we are building out reusable and commonly sort of used components that we can share across multiple agencies. What that brings about is the possibility of a collaboration model, making sure that as the priorities shift and as we see the changes come through, we are able to not only support our partner agencies with using the effectiveness of these AI tools, but also making sure that we are giving them the capabilities that they can repurpose and reuse when it comes to AI solutions. Some of the use cases that I can highlight is that we have established in collaboration with Microsoft and the solutions that we are building for investigative technologies built around AI, wherein we are using AI not only for translating content, which are non-English content, to serve our investigative colleagues who are currently focused on war crime investigations, but also we are providing our partner agencies with the solutions that help them automate these routine analysis and help them monitor these tasks. So thereby we are helping that freeing up of their time and their resources. So the thought process around is not only support them with data-driven decision making, but also give the possibility of the tool sets and the capabilities that UNICC can support with our partner agencies by having that interactive dialogue with our partner agencies and making sure that we are aligned with the wider framework and the guidelines that's prescribed to us by UNESCO and also the new framework and the guidelines that's published by the DTN. So we are making sure that we are the operational support and the capabilities for our partner agencies, especially in bringing these AI solutions to from ideation to production.
Thank you so much, Anusha. I think it's good because you have a very concrete example of what you are doing as a UN agency. So thank you so much. We have a lot of time. If there is any question, we can also have any comments between each speaker if you want to react. So feel free to ask question. I see one question for Martin. What structural changes are required in foreign ministry of a nation when AI is equipped in foreign policy to foster peace, or SDG 16?
Great, happy to take that on, although, you know, full legal disclaimer here with my UN background and hat on, you know, I'm in no position, of course, to give advice to member states on how they should structure their foreign ministry. But maybe speaking from our own experience here, we always like to think about three elements when it comes to driving technological change. One is creating the infrastructure, second one, creating capacity, and third one is scale. And when I talk about kind of creating the infrastructure, it means to have the right policies in place, but also making sure that there is some kind of focal point. And I know that, you know, for instance, the German Federal Foreign Office is looking at internal policies for applying AI in foreign affairs, and us as well. We as a UN family have looked at Gen AI now in particular. There's no formal policy yet in place for staff members, but there's an heavy discussion ongoing on how we make use of that technology. So getting kind of the infrastructure right is important. And then when it comes to capacity building, I think, you know, data literacy was already mentioned, but like building intuitive tools that are easy to use and that allow easy uptake also by the naysayers is, I think, an important part of the transformative process. And then the last one is literally scale, which usually happens when the price drops, right? And the ambition continues. At the moment, we are still at this point where, you know, many of the tools are free of charge, very tempting because there's a hype around it. Some of us know Roy Amara from Stanford, who, you know, came up with this idea saying that, you know, over time we will see some disappointment with the technology. And I think we are facing this already. And then kind of the hype drops, but kind of the evolution of the technology continues. And that's, I think Roy Amara's observation is a good point with regard to structure change, meaning that, you know, kind of transformational technology like Gen AI is not going to go away, right? So starting a conversation about it as we do it now here is, I think, an important part of equipping institutions such as the UN, regional organizations, and foreign ministries, you know, with those considerations to make it part of foreign affairs work. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Martin. Do we have other? I don't see other question in the chat box. Thank you for Parish Root. Okay. Maybe I have a question for Hans Christian and Raphael, to see to what extent you think that actually our Ministry of Foreign Affairs are well equipped to address this question of AI, because as you said, Hans Christian, it is not a new question, but to what extent the staff, the civil servant, the people deployed on the ground, and it could be also the question actually for Martin and Anusha, to what extent do you see them now equipped enough or to have the capacity to understand, as you said, the big opportunity of AI, but also all the risk. What are your feedback on that, talking with your colleagues and other partners?
Happy to take that up, Amandine. Well, I think colleagues are generally speaking quite curious to use it and to learn about it. And as long as it turns out to be a productive tool, I think acceptance will be quite high. But this being said, knowing that probably a large chunk of colleagues is using openly available LLMs to do all kinds of things, which is a nightmare for security officers. It's probably for any organization. I guess that we have every reason to invest quite significantly into making colleagues understand the risks associated, the opportunities and the risk associated, because I have a situation in mind where you're using an LLM or where you're using artificial intelligence to assist you in deciding about, well, matters that might really touch upon people's lives. And I mean, I'm not talking about pensions and things like that, which is quite naturally not part of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it could be payments, it could be whatever, it could be salaries. So situations where you definitely want to make sure that AI supports you in a way that is transparent and that is of high quality. Now, we know the human nature that once you're getting used to a machine assisting you or helping you, you might be losing your critical stance to this kind of technology. Now, I'm not arguing in favor of being too risk averse, but I'm simply saying that we as a data lab, or we as colleagues that are kind of pushing and supporting the introduction of such technology, that we need to make sure that we also define the right in quotation marks, the right mechanisms to always again and again check back if AI is really doing what it should be doing. And I would really be glad to have a bit of feedback and some thoughts and reflections from the audience as well. But Raphael, if you want to add something, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Hans Christian. I think the question is fair. To what extent the ministries are equipped for that? We could probably widen that and say, to what extent is society equipped for that? I think, and that is what Hans Christian mentioned, in the end, it's an iterative process, right? We should be following the development quite closely and have the knowledge and the capacity to use this technology. But in these iterative steps, always check back on ourselves. How is that changing our processes? How is it hopefully improving our processes? And how can we minimize the prospective negative effects of it? And I think in this iterative process, governments, ministries should of course follow what is happening outside as well, but probably have a special responsibility on these reviews, on looking back. Are we doing this in the right way? Are we doing this responsibly?
Thank you, Raphael. Anusha or Martin, do you want to add something?
Yes, perhaps I can take it up. From our perspective, see, we want to make sure that when we are using generative AI, either for content generation, for any of our use cases where there is a decision-making component involved, we are making sure that we are not using unsupervised provision in order for them to use those approaches on behalf of the organization. Yeah, because we always make sure that we include a human review in the generated content, and making sure that there is checking for factual correctness, and the fake news and those kind of verifiable approaches are being integrated with the solution. The other one, very important, is for us to keep using these tools or leverage these tools, is to maintain transparency, accountability, and explainability components being built into these solutions that we are considering to use. Yeah, because the problem that we will fail to address is, like, if we don't document the process, through which we usually generate this important content, and what has contributed to the decision-making process and keeping record of it when it comes to Gen AI tools. It's very important. And also, what parameters are we considering in training these tools is also very important for us to make sure. So what we are trying to do is making sure that appropriate data sets are used prior to the input to the model itself, and also making sure that when we are using large models, large language models, we have that concept of prompt engineering or prompt interjection, just to make sure that we don't put the data to risk, and also make sure that the outputs are reliable. This is making sure that they are not harming the users who are consuming these outputs. Yeah, and as Rafael mentioned, leveraging the technical expertise within the organization, and also making sure that we are including them not only in the throughput of the process, but also from designing the solution from day one. For example, if we are looking to consider to implement a sentiment analysis on the social media channels, we want to make sure that when we are establishing these models, we are establishing a clear review process and an approval process that is aligned with the institutional values, to make sure that the relevant enterprise architecture teams and the relevant data teams and the relevant subject matter experts are involved, are those sort of best practices that we have continued to operationally create as additional guidance to our stakeholder community, to make sure that we are here to mitigate those risks. Right, like, artificial intelligence tools are here to help us. They are a boon and a bane, but we can, with additional guardrails, we will be able to sort of use them or leverage them for the right use cases.
Thank you, Anusha. We have a couple of questions now on the chat box. I don't know if the other speakers had the opportunity to look at it. We have one question from Zach, who actually would like to know if the panelists are aware of use cases or the use of alternative futures analysis of scenario planning techniques to anticipate and prepare for potential AI impacts on political and economic developments. This is the first one. The second one from Guy, interested in having more information about ethics, transparency, and what safeguards we might think about. And the question is there any collaboration with the EU Joint Research Center work on algorithmic transparency, MFA tool, etc.? How might this help ensure we do not have big global imbalance in terms of the data in LLM, and where some MFA have access to great tools and others do not? A question for Martin. When you mentioned machine learning is already a 40-year-old technology, we have not even fully explored its potential, and yet we are already moving on to next buzz. So I think it is also a comment. I believe it is also very difficult to work on fast-moving technology, especially when most colleagues in foreign policy have background in low political science and only have a high-level overview of what is possible. And last question from Florian. What have been significant operational challenges in implementing AI within the domain of foreign affairs and diplomacy? And how do you envision the intersection of AI and diplomacy, especially in addressing global challenges? So maybe Martin, can we start with you? And just pick up some question.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for all those questions. Look, on futures thinking, some of you might be familiar with the methodology STEEP, which includes social, technological, economic, ecological, and political issues that we address in foresight planning. And our colleagues from UNICC have looked at, the impact of AI with regard to autonomous weapons and other peace and security issues. So I point them to their very helpful research. They were also part of this conference over the last days, and they have a lot of work out there on the impact of new technologies in the context of peace and security. So how does that reshape societies? How does that reshape military engagement? So that's my first point. Second pointer as well is to UNESCO when it comes to ethics and readiness. They have really created over the last years very helpful guidance with regard to, how do we integrate AI in institutions? How do we build applications? And there are checklists they recommend. And I know several member states have used this to shape their own AI policies, and institutions have used them as well, including ourselves, like in the UN. Obviously, we use what our colleagues in UNESCO produce. So that's with regard to AI readiness and ethics as well. And just like a counter comment to kind of, the remark that the technology is held by some and needs to be shared. Absolutely, at the moment, we've seen an arms race between mostly US-based and Canadian-based companies vis-a-vis Chinese-based companies. And we need to be very careful, especially on the multilateral side, not to be horned into one or the other. I know that there are some efforts in Europe to provide counter models. There have been some discussion in the UN whether the UN should lead a Manhattan Project on LLMs, but as we heard on Tuesday when we had this session on geospatial issues, the UN doesn't have a satellite in space. So where do we, cough up the money or the support to have multi-billion-dollar investment for our own LLM? But something to consider, right? And Anusha spoke to kind of the intrinsic biases certain LLMs promoted by certain companies carry. So the question still remains, should there be kind of a separate UN effort in that regard? And I want to end with regard to on the point of skills. I think we can take pride as the UN family in the fact that we have changed job profiles. I remember 4 years ago when we stood up the innovation cell, we couldn't even hire data analysts. That job profile didn't exist in the UN. And now we have created job profiles where we can literally bring in colleagues that have very dedicated skill sets. And even the political affairs job profile, we can test against that. So I think the world is changing with regard to skills. We are less and less kind of knowledge-based, right? Because there's Wikipedia, there's ChatGPT, right? Knowledge is like kind of a secondary commodity. It's all about kind of skills and problem solving, and international organizations like UN have realized that. So there are tons of more data-related jobs out there. And I'm happy to see that member states like Germany also, have changed their attitude and their recruitment in that regard, because that is indeed needed to, push those big tankers, the United Nations, regional organizations, and member states forward into a more meaningful tech-driven direction. Back to you.
Thank you, Martin. Hans Christian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amandine. May I pick and choose a little bit, simply not to duplicate what Martin rightly said. I'm taking the second part of what Florian Feiss was putting in the chat. How do you envision the intersection of AI and diplomacy, especially in addressing global challenges? Well, maybe a twofold answer. I mean, AI is certainly going to pose a couple of new challenges with maybe certain knowledge proliferating more easily. But on the other hand, AI itself, I mean, that's a personal opinion, AI itself will not automatically solve any global challenge. I mean, it's going to be humans that are going to do that. So AI might be helpful in supporting that process or in making things a little bit easier. But ultimately, this solution would need to come from a human being. Maybe picking up on what Garen Homero put in the chat, that's actually quite interesting, and I mean it resonates well with one thing that I think is quite important to keep in mind. I mean, the problem comes first, and then you try to find a solution and use the appropriate technology or the appropriate data. So if machine learning is doing the trick and is helpful, for instance, in doing early warning, something that our colleagues at the FFO are doing, and they are using machine learning, then let's use machine learning. It has quite a number of advantages. It's usually quite explainable. So let's use that. So maybe then finally a third point. I like the comment that Guy Benham put in the chat, because I had a very interesting conversation a few days ago as well on the question: how do we actually make sure that we are not that we are how do we make sure that we are finding a good way to allow others, third parties, academia, to regularly, and I'm hesitating to say check, but regularly assess what we are actually doing as a public administration. So things like red teaming or trying to monitor the performance or monitoring the performance of, for instance, LLMs, to me sounds quite reasonable. So that's an interesting, that could potentially be an interesting element in addressing some of those risks that all of us mentioned a bit earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans Christian. Raphael?
Yes, thank you. I would also pick Garen's comment and maybe elaborate a bit on what Hans Christian said. Of course, you're absolutely right that especially machine learning is not a new technology. And I think a lot of organizations, the United Nations, but also the Federal Foreign Office, for example, has used certain kinds of machine learning to solve a number of tasks in the past as well. I think the change that generative AI and especially the large language models are bringing is that they bring in technology, they bring in a new technology in sort of a domain that is very natural to public administration and to diplomacy as well. A lot of things there are text-based. And so I think that is why we're talking about this now, and this is why now is the right time to ask these questions and start working on solutions. Also, of course, because you need a certain drive, a certain openness with the colleagues in the foreign policy field. And of course, you're also right there that they have a law or political sciences background. As I come from a technical background, I don't necessarily see this as a problem, but as an opportunity to really bring together people with a domain expertise, which these people usually have, and bring them together with the developers, with people with technical skills, and in this way, really create teams who are able to contribute technology to solving the day-to-day challenges that these colleagues have.
Thank you, Raphael. Anusha?
Yes, thank you, Amandine. I think I'm going to pick up the first question from Florian. What have been our significant operational challenges in bringing AI solutions for multi-stakeholder community like the UN? Yeah. So what we see is that data quality happens to be the biggest problem. We have extraordinarily well-structured problem statements. When we go insert data, that helps us clarify these problem statements or the hypotheses. What we end up struggling with is the data is not clean, and the high quality data happens to be the biggest challenge that we try to address. Like, 65% of our time goes in cleaning the data, normalizing the data, making the data consumable for these machine learning models. So from a technical perspective, data quality, I would definitely consider as the biggest challenge that we consider in implementing these AI models. Implementing these models is the easy bit because there is a wide array of catalog of models that you can choose from. Now that we are flooded with large language models in the toolset stack, it's no longer a tools problem. It's more around making sure that understanding of data. And also the second challenge that we see now that we have tackled the problem, if we have tackled the problem of data quality, what happens into the mix is that for us to address the model performance, right? Like, model performs as good as the data it's fed. that's the main logic that these models work. So for us to make sure that consistently we are fine-tuning these models and making sure these models' performance are accurate enough for our consumption, and making sure that we have the availability of the subject matter experts, as Rafael mentioned, and also as Hans mentioned, not only having the technical expertise, having the subject matter expertise availability is also very important. I think it's not just a one-way problem, it's a two-way street. So we are here to get there together. So the operational challenges are not difficult to tackle.
Thank you, Anusha. It's going to be, I think, the last word for this session, because we are almost on time. I mean, we still have 2 minutes left, but I don't want to reopen the floor. We don't have any additional question. But I would like to thank you again for accepting the invitation, for being part of this Data for Peace session. Thank you for all your comments and questions, and thank you also to the speaker. Big thank you for sharing so many materials also that actually we can just have a look at for the next coming days and months. Thank you again for the organizer. Thank you, Branka. And so have a nice day, have a nice evening, and see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.